Innana returns. Chapter 15. Gandivia. Anki's sons had grown up knowing that all of Terra would have belonged to them if it had not been for Enlil and his sons. Anki's own bitterness and animosity towards his brother Enlil had seeped into their lives like poison. The Ankites, passionately determined to avenge themselves, opposed Enlil's every move. As Anki lost control of his sons, their hatred undermined his family. Marduk, along with his son Nabu, sought to steal power away from his own brothers. Nergal, who was unwilling to give Marduk all the power, put up the biggest fight, even forming an alliance with Enlil's son Ninurta. Ninurta commanded the Enlight flight squadrons which patrolled Terra. He had led the famed Gatuyan hordes into Akkad to destroy what was left of my armies, and Ninurta was given the task of restoring the water systems of the Euphrates after Marduk had contaminated them. Ninurta and his wife Gula were stationed in the city of Lagash. Ninurta, who loved flying and commanding the air force, was also fond of building and engineering. He looked forward to the challenge of cleaning the river, but he detested the daily grind of governing and had no passion or patience for the social life that accompanied such duties. His wife Gula was devoted to him, but alas, Ninurta was too strange to be anyone's companion. Perhaps he had built a wall around himself to deflect the constant attention of his overbearing mother Ninhursag. Ninurta became more remote, withdrawing into himself. He neglected the governing of the cities and disappeared for days, flying off in his favorite airship, the Blackbird. Ninurta wanted to build pyramids. Ever since the war, he had been envious of the great pyramids of Egypt, and he invited the Egyptian architects who had been part of the design and building of Giza to begin work in Sumer. To his wife's pleasure, this occupied him for a time, keeping him near home. But gradually the lure of flying alone in his ship called to him. Flying far, far away from all civilization, Ninurta wandered endlessly through remote mountains. He formed a legion of fighters in these mountains and taught them the martial arts and joined the simple company of these rustic men. Ninurta became disillusioned with the ways of his family and the gods. Troubled in his heart by our endless conflicts, he reflected back on his childhood when Terra was an unknown adventure. He longed for the time when he had been free from the ominous responsibilities of being Enlil's son. I will freely admit that I never completely understood Ninurta. He is a complex person, always torn between the burdens of his duties and a compelling need to be simply a playful little boy, the little boy he had perhaps never been. With Ninurta out of the way, for long periods of time, Marduk looked back at his Babylon and the surrounding cities. He and his followers began to infiltrate the villages of the neighboring countryside, and using holography, Marduk appeared before the leaders of certain tribes, calling himself by many names. These tribes were encouraged to bow down and worship Lord Marduk. He performed many miracles for them, gave them power and wealth, and warned them that the gods of Enlil and his kind were false. Marduk told the tribespeople that those who did not worship him would be punished. they would be damned to hell forever. The humans had been conditioned over the centuries to worship outside themselves, namely us, and they had very little defense against such manipulation. How were they to know which God was true? Certainly all of the gods were fickle. They had abandoned the humans more than once. The tribespeople reasoned perhaps they should follow the God who provided for them the best. Or might it be better to obey the God who threatened terrible punishment just to avoid such things? Marduk did an excellent job of confusing people. By insidiously eroding the power of the other gods, he began to win the devotion of the rulers. The science of mind control and brainwashing propaganda was in its beginning stages. In the nurture's absence, Enlil realized he must appoint someone better suited to the task of ruling Sumer. He chose my father Nana from the city of Ur. Nana and Ningal, my mother, began to rebuild and the normal trade routes and to restore agriculture and business in the area. The temples resumed their normal activity and the new ziggurats were constructed. Yet things were not right. There was friction and enmity in the very air of terror. It was as if the planet were a being who could not bear the struggles and hatreds of the gods, and an uneasy feeling surrounded all. Ambition and greed ran rampant throughout the land. One kingship was declared only to be overthrown by another. Skirmishes increased as tempers flared. The eyes of Marduk glanced out over his future domains. You can read the history of this time for yourself, as much was written in the clay tablets. Marduk and his son Nabu battled and warred with the Enlights over and over to gain territory and control over the spaceport. On the side of Enlil were my father Nana, my brother Autu, Ninurta, and Nergal, the son of Anki. Towards the end of these terrible wars, Matali went to his old friend Anki. Matali had always been in command of Anki's personal ship, and the two had passed many an hour together. Matali begged Anki to speak to his sons. What was to be gained by this endless fighting? Surely the land and the people of Terra will only suffer more. What if the sons of Anki and Enlil were to die in battle? What would be left of either of the patriarchs? The outcome of this war could only be mutual annihilation, as both sides had awesome weapons. If Anu called for the Gandivia, no one could stop it. Who could predict the end of such a devastating war? After listening to Matali, Anki visited his son Nergal and tried to reason with him, but Nergal resisted. He had always believed that Anki favored Marduk. The truth was more pathetic. Marduk possessed a subtle form of mind control over his father, and Anki was simply powerless in Marduk's presence. Nergal was only further enraged by Anki's attempts to coerce him into making peace with Marduk. The angry Nergal ordered Anki to leave and cursed both his father and his brother, vowing to destroy them. Alone, poor Anki sadly wept. He did not know what to quite do, and he longed for happier times, even for Antu's parties. The prophets of doom began to multiply. Across the land, every priest, soothsayer, whispered tales of ensuing destruction, and the end of the world was prophesied by the oracles in all of the temples. Many of the predictions were absurd and never came true, but it was as if the people were addicted to such pronouncements. The more frightening and ghastly the forecast, the more money people would pay to hear them. The prophets were indeed making great profits. New buildings were erected to hold all of the rulers who desired to gather and be filled with fear. Tales of the coming famines and the devastation of entire cities were among the most popular prophecies, while earthquakes and floods tied for second place. The looters would pay all of their money to come and listen to such tales and be frightened out of their wits. This fear generated an energy Marduk learned to feed off of, and he began to encourage fear by projecting holographic images onto the skies, creating terrifying visionary scenes. He experimented with his fear energy, manipulating and modifying it to satiate his appetite. It was better than human flesh and easier to manage. The prophecies became self-fulfilling. One dreadful day, the armies of Marduk swept down upon Enlil's holy city, Nippur. Ninurta rallied his troops in defense, but the temple and the holy shrines were destroyed. An implacable Enlil responded by mandating the destruction of Babylon, the city most beloved by Marduk, along with all of Marduk's logistical centers. Enlil called a council of war, and the dreaded question was put to his father Anu. The Gandivia weapon could only be activated by the command of Anu, for once the great Gandivia had been released, the outcome could not be predicted. Nergal attempted one last meeting with his brother Marduk. If Marduk could give his claim or give up his claim to the supreme rulership, the Gandivia would remain sleeping. Anki, who was present with Marduk and the bull, seemed to be in a state of blindness, as if his will had been broken. Engulfed in darkness, Anki spewed out of his rage and frustration at Nergal, and Nergal's anger grew. Leaving his father and Marduk, Nergal determined to use the Gandivia. Nothing could stop it now. All of the gods were aware of the possible dangers of the Gandivia. Even Marduk became afraid when he realized that his brother Nergal really meant to use it. Anu was filled with sorrow. The jealousy of his sons had brought terror to this. Anu could see how weak his son Anki had become, and Anu preferred to destroy the cities and the spaceport rather than allow everything to fall into the hands of the unruly Marduk. Anu and Enlil saw something dark, almost evil in Marduk and his ambitions. Marduk wanted to take over the entire planet Terra, to take power from Anu, and even to rule Pleiades. Marduk had become a serious threat, like a machine devouring everything in its way, with no feeling, no heart, no joy of being, only in ruthless conquest. Anu unleashed the Gandivia, a blaze of light, razor sharp and more potent than the sun, flashed in a zaggering motion. Although aimed at specific objects, the Doomsday weapon was impervious to distinctions. It was not just the spaceport that was destroyed. Many other locations logistically important to Marduk on Terra disappeared as well. The entire Sinai Peninsula was laid to waste, along with numerous other targets. But what became crucial was something we had not planned for and could not control: the wind. It is an irony that the name Enlil can mean Lord of the Wind, but in that moment, neither Enlil nor any other god could control the winds of death that blew over Sumer. Clouds of radiation swept across the plains, killing every human and animal in their path. The radiation poisoning disintegrated the cells of their bodies, and the skin fell from their bones. Their blood evaporated in the dry, scorching winds, and they died in agonizing pain. The ones of the periphery suffered the most. It took them the longest to die. The lands were black, with nuclear fires, and the waters were contaminated with poison. Safe in their ships, the gods watch as once again their folly destroyed millions of lives. Entire villages vanished in total annihilation. Animals and crops, bridges and ziggurats disappeared from the face of the planet Earth, or Terra herself convulsed in pain. What have they done? Only a few survivors remain amidst the dreadful devastation that once had been a green and beautiful planet. The violence of the Gandivia and the ensuing radiation clouds created a shock, and this shock became a wave which sent a signal out into the solar system. Moving past the last planets of the sun, the signal traveled across the galaxy and on past further into other sectors. Across the vastness of space, the signals was received by the Council of the Intergalactic Federation. Those Pleiadians playing around on Earth had done it now. They had gone too far finally. They must be stopped. Such irresponsible behavior could and would not be tolerated. The equilibrium of the entire universe had been disturbed. A call went out and we were summoned to the Great Hall of the Intergalactic Federation Council. We had been so immersed in ourselves and our play that we had forgotten all about the rest of the universe. Who were these intruders who dared call us from our play? I knew very well who they were, and he summoned all of us with authority.